Well, it's still Penn State week, folks, so we will preview it, of course, here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all stopping by. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. You've arrived at Buckeyes Live for an umpteenth, a zillionth edition that we will find out here when I post the banner. We're around 350 that we show up each and every week for all of you. So leave those comments and questions and consider that Steve and Tony give up their time each and every week to talk Ohio State football with you. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 with me. Steve, what's going on today?
Not too much of anything. It is Wednesday here of Penn State week. And, obviously not the Ohio State-Penn State game, a potential 1-2 game that we thought we might see in the preseason. Ohio State's held up their end. They're 7-0 and 4-0 in the Big Ten, but obviously this is a completely lost season for Penn State. They've lost 4 games in a row and 3-4, and I don't think there's anybody anywhere who conjured anything like this was even remotely possible. And it started with the home loss in 2 overtimes to Oregon, and it just kind of picked up steam as a snowball rolling downhill, and is now a complete unstoppable avalanche there in Happy Valley from the top of Nittany Mountain, because this program has come apart at the seams. And they went out to UCLA, which was 0-4, and lost that game, came back home, lost to Northwestern by a point, and they fired James Franklin as a result of that. His 12th year as the coach, going to pay him about a $48 to $50 million buyout. And then last week with Terry Smith as the interim head coach, they went to Iowa and lost that game by a point. That was actually 2 weeks ago because they were on an open week this past week. And insult to injury, Drew Aller, their quarterback, was lost at the end of the Northwestern game. So any chance they had of generating much offense the rest of the way seems to be gone. They did score 24 points in the loss at Iowa. But the new quarterback, Ethan Grunkemeyer, who is coincidentally from Olentangy High School right outside Columbus, redshirt freshman, he only threw for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. It was the running back, Katron Allen, who really came through big for them and kept them in that game at Iowa with like 140 yards rushing. So they're going against the number 1 defense in the country at Ohio Stadium. And it does not bode well for young Mr. Grunkemeyer or the Nittany Lions, as they will head over here on Friday and get ready to play the Buckeyes. A 20.5-point underdog is what Penn State is. It went from being basically a pick-em type game in the preseason to hard to imagine any way Penn State could win this game this time around.
Yeah, they did give it a shot at Kinnick, although they had some fortuitous bounces, a blocked field goal that pretty much just landed right in the guy's lap for a 50-yard touchdown return on the last play of the first half, and a couple interceptions that were deflected and so forth. But anyway, Tony, things change quickly in college football. 1 week, you can be 1 play away from defeating one of the best teams in the country to break through with a huge top 5 win, and 2 weeks later, coach fired, season over, shut it down.
Well, this 4-game losing streak that Penn State is on, the difference at the end of regulation in those 4 games has been 7 points. The complete total difference has been 7 points, to give you an idea of how close Penn State is to still having James Franklin and still being a ranked team. But again, let's not forget, this is the unanimous Big Ten preseason favorite. We should never forget that. We should never let anybody forget that so many people, so many experts viewed this Penn State program as being the pinnacle of the Big Ten this season. And that did not go well for anybody. And so, you mentioned the blocked field goal last week. It's even worse than that. That was a 66-yard field goal attempt that was blocked and returned for just a 35-yard touchdown. That's how far that kick was, that it was only returned 35 yards for a touchdown. And that was a very John L. Smith kind of thing to do. And Kirk Ferentz took ownership of that. And Yeah, you watched that game, and I'm one of the unfortunate few that went back and watched it to see what this Penn State offense is, and they have no passing game with Meyer. Now, this was his first real action all season and first career start. Has not gotten to play much because Penn State has not been good enough to allow a backup quarterback in. And Terry Smith, their interim head coach, is imploring Andy Kolodnicki to throw the ball downfield, get some downfield shots in this game because East-West isn't going to cut it. They need to find some big shots, and they don't really have the offense to get that done either, which is unfortunate. This is not going to be a good scene for Ethan Grunkemeyer, even though he did finally get, a couple weeks of practice where he is the starter.
I checked the defensive rankings this week. Iowa is number 2 in the nation in total defense, and Ohio State's number 1. And those are his first 2 assignments. And then he's got Indiana to deal with, and they've played pretty well this season. So,
yeah, somebody said they're having a really good year there in Indiana.
Yeah, somebody's noticed here recently.
Somebody said that. I don't know who it was, but yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of the marquee games in the conference, and still draws the big noon kickoff, as it not necessarily should, but it's the
who else is it going to be?
They're going to bring the eyeballs.
I mean, who else is it going to be?
Nebraska, but
they're playing on the West Coast, so
I think it's at Nebraska.
I think it's at Nebraska.
Oh, it's at Nebraska. I'm sorry.
That's
But
why
still,
it had a chance to be this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I give him credit for not having a passing attack. Katron Allen, as I just looked it up here, did rush for 145 yards. It took him 28 carries, so that's not necessarily a great average per carry, but they kind of just chipped away, and he had 2 touchdowns. Nicholas Singleton has been kind of marginalized here.
Yeah.
It's clearly Katron Allen is the lead back. Singleton only had 6 carries for 15 yards. They brought in some promising wide receivers in the portal because that was kind of their Achilles heel, that nobody for Drew Aller to throw to. But, Grunkemeyer, 15 of 28, 93 yards, 2 interceptions in his first outing, obviously. So, to me, I don't I'm wrestling. I said this on our Bucknuts Morning 5 radio show today. My 2 scores that I'm thinking about are 31-13, which would not be a cover, or 34-10, which would be. So I'm kind of, and then I just go back to how dominant Ohio State was in the last 2 games against Illinois and Wisconsin, just getting out early and just being so dominant that hardly giving the opponent a chance to breathe and putting them away early. And we could very well see that. I mean, it could be 17-0 at the end of the first quarter in this game, or it could be 3-3. I mean, it's a hard game to reconcile because you believe in Penn State's defense, but if Penn State can't move the ball at all, and nobody really has against Ohio State. Only one team has scored double digits, and that was Illinois in 7 games. I'm left with how does Penn State generate any offense if that's going to be their passing attack? I don't know how it happens.
So Tony, again, you took it in. I took in the 30 play highlight package, and it's difficult to get a feel for that as they cut off the play as soon as the play is over and you don't get any kind of perspective on the context. But you've got a highly touted kid at quarterback, albeit super inexperienced, but he was pretty highly ranked coming out of high school, and he's been in the program for 2 years. And they bring in Trevor Pena from Syracuse, and I can't think of Ross's first name from Troy, and Kyron Hudson from USC, and they had a offensive line situation coming into the season where they had 9 of their 10 2 deep coming back. They were stacked there. So as you assess the attempt at trying to mount a passing game, where is the blame to be assessed?
Well, the blame, you mentioned that Meyer is the high school accolades. I mean, he's just unprepared. Like Lincoln Keenholz, as a true freshman against Missouri, just was not capable. And this is not entirely his fault. He's in a very bad situation. He could not handle the blitz when Iowa absolutely needed to stop. They'd blitz and he'd get stopped. Not that letting him throw for 6 yards or 4 yards on a given drive is like that's just as good as a stop because they're not going anywhere. So the passing game, they went deep twice in the second half because I'm sure at halftime Terry Smith is like, we need to go deep. We need to try something. And so the first drive of the third quarter, they went deep, no avail. They did it again later in the second half, did not complete the pass. So they tried it twice in the second half. I'm going to assume they're going to open up pretty quickly with that at some point. They'd love to get the running game going for some play action with Katron Allen. The running game has been pretty hit and miss for opponents against Ohio State. Sometimes it gets going a little bit, but it doesn't get sustained. So they're going to try some things. And the other thing with this offense that they're going to have double passes. They're going to have halfback options. Like they're going to try whatever they can to make big plays. And Ohio State's very, very disciplined. So as long as they're engaged, I'm seeing in terms of like picking a score, like I don't know that Penn State scores more than 10, and I think 10 might be a lot. Unless Meyer has grown a lot in these 2 weeks since that Iowa game. Because if it's that Penn State offense, you might get 7. I don't see you scoring twice without, a mistake from Ohio State.
Well, I think it's safe in saying this is the biggest wild card team in the country. Clemson might be another, but they still have their head coach. They still have their program intact, and they're also playing Boston College and North Carolina every week. And they're still figuring out ways to lose those games. Where Penn State, has to line up against Iowa, Ohio State, and Indiana in consecutive games. But the talent is still there. Mm-hmm. It must be bought in to some degree for this team to come within 1 point of Iowa. And of course, Iowa plays close games against everyone until, I guess, recently they started to blow some teams out. So they didn't do that to Penn State. So at least maybe, I don't know if that was a one-shot deal where they figured, okay, we're going to give it a go. This, win one for the new coach we like, who's been around forever. Or they can sustain this for a season, or if they get hit on the chin, like Steve outlines, is a huge possibility, 17-0, that they completely implode, or, what's left in this team is anybody's guess.
Yeah, I'm, again, kind of still trying to reconcile in my mind, how does Penn State stay in this game for 4 quarters? And I don't think they can, just without generating much offense. And Ohio State's run defense has been really, really good. I got the national rankings here. Rushing defense, 8th in the country, 85.6. Yet last week, Iowa is right in that same realm, giving up about 89 yards per game rushing, and they gave up like 150 or 160 to a team that could not throw the ball. So I don't know what that means. I don't know. To me, if you had a team that is not capable of throwing the ball, wouldn't you just man up outside and put 7.5 men in the box? I mean, isn't that what you would do? I guess I'm confused. Why they gave up so many yards rushing. Probably just kept it, probably said you may have 2 or 3 yards or 4 yards rushing the football. That's fine. We are not going to give up the big play, obviously, to let you get back in this game. So it was kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts as opposed to one big, rock over the head with a 40-yard touchdown pass or something. So Penn State took what Iowa was giving them, I presume, and that was, 3 and 4 yard chunks, and that's how those numbers stacked on top of one another eventually, I guess. But I just don't know how they do it against Ohio State. Caden McDonald is just a monster. Coach Day referred to him as a potential game wrecker yesterday. And, defensive tackle for Ohio State, he's having a great year. Arvell Reese, everybody has him going to the NFL in the first round right now. At linebacker, Sonny Styles has been pretty solid. And then Caleb Downs as well at safety. He's kind of like the Maytag repairman back there, just, waiting for things to go wrong, and they never do. So, it is it's been a lot of fun to watch Ohio State play defense. I'll say that. And they probably lead the country in 3 and outs, I would think, or they're near the top, I would think.
Penn State led that game 21-10, and they still found a way to lose. I think there's something to be said for that. It is on the road. Mark Gronowski had a couple of long runs in there, which you're not going to get from Julian Sayin. So, we would not that we would ever compare Iowa's offense to Ohio State's offense, but I could see a 17-7 final that is as much of a blowout as a 42-7 thing would be, just because Ohio State has no reason to score more than 7 points. And once they get to 10, they know this game is over type of thing. And they kind of shut it down a little bit. But also, it is Jim Knowles. So, there are going to be a lot of people on the Ohio State sideline that want to put some points on the board and say hello to the former defensive coordinator. And, they are coming off of a bye week. I did look back on this is the 8 games under Ryan Day as head coach where Ohio State is coming off of a bye week. They are 8-0. They are winning those games by an average score of 46-11. When they are playing an opponent who has, let's say potentially messed with the defense and tried to harm the defense, i.e. Maryland in 2019, when Mike Loxley maybe shouted out and pointed out that Chase Young should be suspended for something. That game was Ohio State 73-14. So there are times when Ryan Day wants to send a message. He certainly has in the past, but maybe this is a kinder, gentler Ryan Day. But also, he did say yesterday, yes, this is a business, but also we're human, so it's impossible not to take some things personally.
Yeah, I think yesterday's comments by Ryan Day were very classy. Kept it kind of above the belt line. Didn't take a shot at Jim Knowles. Just said, this is becoming more and more like the NFL every day, where people are here one day and they're gone the next, and it's just kind of the way it is. Asked about his relationship with Jim Knowles. They worked together for 3 years. Every day for 3 years. And he basically said, well, he was here, we won the national championship, and then he was gone. And, sometimes relationships on a good note, and sometimes they don't end on a good note. And it's just a way of life, I guess, at this time in college football, that's how things are going to be. And, left it at that. And I think time will heal all wounds. And, I think, Coach Day has his side of it. Coach Knowles has his side of it. And, to my understanding, he had a 3-year contract, was being paid $2.2 million. And as they were going for the national championship, there may have been a 1-year rollover, or he may have gotten an extension in there. So he was actually under some type of contract for 2025. He went and asked, hey, can I get, a raise or, an extension based on us going to the national championship game? And Ohio State and Ryan Day were like, well, hey, let's get through this week. Let's win this game. Let's beat Notre Dame, and then it'll all take care of itself. And Jim Knowles thought he was being kind of left twisting in the wind, when that really, was not necessarily the case. He was already the number 3 paid assistant coach in the country, $2.2 million. So he was being paid pretty well. He jingled James Franklin, and James Franklin immediately, the light bulb goes off in his head. This is a team I can't beat. This is the defensive coordinator who helped them win the national championship. And if we bring him over here, we can hurt our number 1 nemesis. I can't even say it when I want to say it. Nemesis. We can hurt our number 1 opponent, and also put ourselves in position to contend for a national championship. And they gave him a 3-year contract, which, as I understand, is worth like $3.1 million a year. And the funny thing about this is, they blew James Franklin out of there for $48 million or whatever it is. Whoever they hire, whoever they bring in, whoever takes the job, Matt Rule, whoever it may be, I don't know who even want to take that job or who will take it, but the athletic director is going to have to look them in the eye and say, would you at least for 5 minutes consider hanging on to Jim Knowles, because we are on the hook to pay him $6 million over the next 2 years. And, sometimes you have shotgun weddings and these kind of things that come about in these situations. So I'm going to tend to believe he'll still be there next year, just because I think the new coach is going to maybe try and give him another shot or give him a chance to, at least coach there 1 year under him. So any rate, long way around the bend. I think time will heal all wounds. One day, eventually, everybody could be cordial. Perhaps he'll come back for a 10-year reunion when they win the national championship, recognize them in 2034 or whatever that'll be. And, it is what it is. It's just a business. As we see every day, we are reminded that old collegial win one for, old State U has been thrown out the window and then backed over, by a tractor trailer. It just doesn't exist anymore. So, it's unfortunate that's the way it is, but that's college football, I guess, right now in whatever the hell year this is, 2024.
Five.
Badass Buckeyes going 45-6. As soon as I saw that score, I thought, was that not the score in 2000 when, unfortunately, the Penn State player Talafario was paralyzed?
Yeah, we don't look that as an omen, obviously.
I believe it was 45-6 that year. Tony, you gave me the thumbs up on that score?
I believe that's what it was. We had that in my head yesterday as well. Because there's not a lot of blowouts in this rivalry, in this series, which is why, maybe a 24-7 type of thing. And again, it would be so far out of arm's reach anyway, because the idea of Penn State scoring 27 against Ohio State seems impossible based on what we've seen so far. But as Ryan Day said, these are all still the same players that were the preseason number 3 team, number 2 team, other than the quarterback. But that's also a very big other than to throw in there.
And this is what's kind of, lost in this whole thing is just, again, getting back to the business aspect of this whole thing. This is one of the, has the potential, if they allowed it to continue, to be, in a decade or two, one of the great rivalries in college football history. I mean, it really does. It's kind of on its way down that path, and the plug is being pulled because after this year, they've played every year since 1993 when Penn State joined the Big Ten. They've been a protected rival every year since then for Ohio State. Well, in this new 18-team Big Ten, it didn't end up being a protected rivalry. And it's not sure if it was Ohio State that said that or if it was Penn State that said to the Big Ten, nah, we don't want to continue with that. The flip side of this is the one neat thing about the 18-team Big Ten, and the only neat thing about it, I will say, is in the course of 4 years, a player will play at least one game against all 17 other Big Ten teams and has a very, very good chance of playing at least one road game at all of the venues, across the 17-team landscape, the other 17 schools. Now, some of the schools that have 2 and 3 protected rivals may not be able to do all of that, but, something close to it. So that's the one good part of it is you'll get to see a lot of different stadiums in your time as a Big Ten player. The bad part of it is this rivalry that has been played 40 times and every year since 1993 is going to go on a 2-year hiatus. And getting back to the fact about the margin, the last 8 times they played, Ohio State has won. Obviously, everybody knows Franklin was 1-10, I believe, in his time at Penn State against Ohio State. Not a good record. 4-21 against top 10 teams, as we all know, after the loss to Oregon earlier this year. But in these 8 games, Ohio State's margin of victory has been just under 7 points with 2 1-point wins. So these teams have played down to the last possession in most of these last 8 games. And so that's what in the back of your head, you're like, it's got to be that way, doesn't it? Well, not if Penn State can't get a first down, it doesn't. So that's the biggest question to me is if Penn State can generate 200 yards and 16 points. Can they even get that? I just don't know that they can.
Even in the – go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, if I'm understanding your gripe, Steve, about the 18-team league, the issue that you have concerning this rivalry, if it is one, could be corrected. So you can still have 18 teams because for as much as I didn't want the Pac-12 blown up to bits and for these conferences to be 53 teams wide, because then you got discrepancies of schedules that cannot be dealt with, that are so difficult to deal with, it has created so many more good games. You have Washington, Illinois. You've got USC, Illinois. You've got USC, Michigan. You've got all these.
Indiana and Oregon was a great game.
Yeah,
I mean,
all these upper level games that you had a 3-game season for 5 years before.
Yeah, it was Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, Michigan. And those were the only 3 games that mattered.
And if Ohio State and or Penn State deemed this series to be that important, they would have told the Big Ten, let's keep this series. As was requested by all these
I'm thinking
schools.
Penn State's had their nose rubbed in it to the point where they were like,
Yeah.
we're okay if we don't have to play Ohio State every year and we're going to get to go play UCLA or Washington. I think we'll be okay with that. So
And it will be interesting to see what the next head coach thinks of that at Penn State, because I think James Franklin was certainly done. And there's no reason for Ohio State to fight to keep the Penn State game when you've already got Michigan and you know they're going to get somebody out west. You know, like there's always going to be a television product that needs to be put in place for Ohio State. So I don't think neither program was like, boy, we better keep this. And but in terms of the rivalry and that 7-point differential, even the games that are separated by like 13 or 14 points, those were late scores by Ohio State to like, backdoor cover type of thing where they're scoring on the last play of the game, or, it's like they were down by 3 and they win by 12 somehow. And it's just like
the JTT game,
of
course.
Yeah, the Tuimoloau game.
And then the other one in Columbus, the year before, the year after, where who made the
Joey
big fumble
Bosa
recovery?
Joey or Nick Bosa scoring at the end to like make it a double-digit score or something like that. So yeah, it's rarely a blowout, but this is going to be certainly a rarer situation. And then the one last thing, Steve, I want to get back to in terms of keeping Jim Knowles. Keep in mind, Urban Meyer, the last 2 college jobs he took, he kept the defensive coordinator that was already there. At Florida, he kept Charlie Strong. At Ohio State, he kept Luke Fickell. Maybe he keeps Jim Knowles when he takes over Penn State.
Somebody asked me about would Urban Meyer want to take that job, and I'm like, I just don't think that Urban would do a great job as a college head coach in this era, because one, the buying of players and the tediousness and the time, you can't just look at Tom Lemming's list of the top high school players and say, we'll take 3, 5, and 8, like he could do, in the past, and just, put those people in his shopping cart. It doesn't work like that anymore. You have to put thousands of hours into very tedious film study of everybody who plays football across the country, basically, to figure out who can play and who can't, and who can you get in the transfer portal, and who's in the transfer portal that has a name that you don't want, and all these things. And I just don't see Urban wanting to put that time commitment into it. I just don't. And especially if he doesn't have Mickey Marotti or Mark Pantoni kind of, alongside. Those are the guys who really make the program pop. Pantoni to help recruit the best players and identify the best portal players and all these other things. And then Marotti to develop them. They're the 2 best at what they do in the country, by far. So, what's Urban look like without those guys, I think it looks a lot more like what happened with the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he was just kind of a fish out of water without all of his guys who did the grunt work for him. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think he wants it. I think this Fox gig is about as cushy as it gets for him, and he's getting to go around the country and has a smile on his face and gets to be the grand old man of the game, and just enjoy his family and enjoy his life. And once the Big Ten championship game is over in early December, he's basically off until August the following year. I mean, he's got a 9-month off period where he didn't have to do anything. He has zero responsibilities. So
he might have to show up every now and again at the Big Ten Network offices to do some Jerry DiNardo shoots and things of that nature. But
yeah,
you're also going to need to find a place like he does not have the. Do you have the patience anymore to build a foundation and a culture in this kind of era? And it's really hard to do. And the amount of patience from the outside is no longer there either. So if Urban Meyer is taking over somewhere, you expect, boom, okay, it's fixed. It's like, well, it's not quite like that. It takes more time than that. It's like, well, yeah, we're not giving you more time than that because we're mad now. And that's where whoever takes this Penn State job, and I've said it before, you're still working on James Franklin's timeline because everybody's still pissed about what's going on. So you better beat Ohio State. You better do something, and you better beat somebody in the playoffs that matter, let alone just getting there, because that's not good enough either.
Would Urban flame out like Hoodie? No, he's not going to flame out like Hoodie and go 3-9, but in a bad 3-9 at that. 8-4, is definitely within the realm of possibility if he goes somewhere where they don't have players, and maybe people will flock to go play for him. I don't know. He'd have to assemble a great staff, on the fly, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's possible to me. But
everything you say, Steve, makes total sense to me. But I also don't know how many coaches are good enough to be an upgrade over James Franklin and be the guy that's going to push it from 10-2 to serious college football national championship caliber program. But to add to your argument, if anybody values recruiting, we'll take 3, 5, and 8 Urban Meyer. I don't know that he can do that. I don't know that Penn State, it's an extremely good recruiting factory, but it's not. He wants elite. Like we have to be one of the top 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Well, and recruits nowadays say he takes the job next year, and I'm not saying that. I don't think he will. The recruits that he'd be looking at are now we're like probably 6 or 7 years old when he was last coaching, and a known quantity. So again, he's not a known quantity necessarily to the players. They know of him, but that's that they haven't seen anything from him. But maybe 10 years ago before he took or 12 years ago before he took the Ohio State job, like if there's no Ohio State job, I could have seen him taking the Penn State job. But now, no.
It's going to be a fascinating go around, that's for sure.
A lot of rumors out there about Brian Hartline may have been contacted by Penn State, or his agent had some reach out to them. And I think that this is his agent angling to get him a Jim Knowles $3 million a year contract at Ohio State, is what I would take that to be, is that, don't sleep on my guy over here. You got to pay him to keep him. And I don't think Hartline necessarily has the desire to be the Penn State head coach. And I can't believe Penn State would turn the reins of that program over to somebody, who is a rank amateur in terms of being a head coach. So I don't know, that was kind of interesting this week that popped up.
Well, and the Ohio State offense, and it's funny because, Ohio State scoring offense 21st nationally, Ohio State total offense 36th nationally. Like, these aren't great numbers for an offensive coordinator, but he's operating at the speed that his head coach is comfortable with. So kind of being limited in what he can and can't do, not by his play calling, because that's Brian Hartline, but by the pace of play. So you're not scoring 45 points a game like they used to. You're not putting up 550 yards in a game anymore, because that's not the path to a national championship. So it will be interesting to see, like, what is the value of an offensive coordinator in this Ohio State offense now, because, like, especially with Ryan Day as the head coach, you say $3 million, and Ohio State might be willing to say, like, okay, go ahead. It worked out for Jim Knowles, didn't it? It's like, no, it did not. And that was one of the things Ryan Day said yesterday. Like, they want to do enough to keep their players and their coaches. So I don't know what the number is. I don't think they want to lose Brian Hartline for a number of reasons, and I think he's happy. I do think eventually he wants to be a head coach, and if you want to pay him $3 million to be an assistant until he finally goes and makes 5 or 6 as a head coach, it's all monopoly money anyway, right?
Ryan Dawes, thanks for stopping by. We appreciate the contribution. Always good to see you, sir. Do you gentlemen think Penn State will have some down years similar to Michigan after Lloyd Carr left? All depends on the $64,000 question, is who they're going to hire. They did not fire James Franklin to become Michigan Brady Hoke or Rich Rod, of course, but that's the risk you take.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take, is that, okay, you've ripped up Franklin because 10-2 wasn't good enough, and making the Final Four last year, was almost completely discounted. So you run the risk of it not being that good going forward. You're going to slip back to 8-4, 9-3, maybe even 7-5. So I don't know. I think it depends who you get, and how quickly they can assemble a staff, and how quickly they can assemble a roster, and do they have, chips to go buy players with, and how many guys stick around, and, do the right guys stick around, and, a lot of variables there to know. But, Penn State is such a remote place, and, it is probably the top football program on the Eastern Seaboard, or at least, from Mason-Dixon line north to Maine, and from the Ohio-Pennsylvania border east, but so that is what, 30% of the population, 40% of the population lives there. So they do have free reign to get a lot of the top guys on the Eastern Seaboard, but you also gotta go outside those areas to the south and the west, and get some guys there as well. So I'll be interested to see. They run this very real risk, as Ryan says. It could get worse before it gets any better.
I tweeted this back on October 4th, so. That was after the UCLA game. Is that when James Franklin got fired then? Or was it after?
No, it was after Northwestern.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that
he got to make the final walk off, waiting for every last player to come off the field for 5 minutes, and then got the cat calls all the way back to the locker room, and dead man walking, asked about being dead man walking several times in the post-game press conference, and then the next day, that was that. So,
but in terms of who's going to do better, this was after the UCLA loss. So James Franklin's first 12 years in Penn State, winning percentage of .707. Joe Paterno's first 12 years in the Big Ten, .671. His last 12 years in the Big Ten, .634. So you want something better than the best that you've had in modern football, and that's irrational. And James, Kurt Cignetti is getting so many people fired, and I think he got James Franklin fired as well. Now, again, James Franklin didn't look like he wanted to be there anymore anyway, so I think that's a factor. But to expect somebody that is going to be better than James Franklin when that's never been the case in modern football, you have to go back to Penn State's time as an independent, which no longer exists for anybody outside of Connecticut and Notre Dame or whatever. But like, this is not modern football. That was not modern football. This is modern football now. And to expect something that has never been done by this program is irrational. Now, to expect you don't lose to those two programs is fine. But to fire somebody over it again, unless he just didn't want to be there and it looked like he didn't, you just at some point, if this was 6 years in and it happens, you don't fire him. 12 years in and it's just like, well, I think we all need a change, right? Yeah, let's just
Never getting any better.
Right. And so then it's like, well, let's try to get better, even though you'd probably accept 707 winning percentage from whomever, right? Just beat Ohio State once in a while, although now you won't necessarily need to. Win some playoff games that aren't against the worst teams in the playoffs. That would help as well. So I think there is probably an easier path to keeping Penn State fans happy while not even winning as much, because you could win differently and that will do enough to keep them happy.
And I think that's the key. That's what I was waiting for right there, was instead of 9-3 constantly, some kind of breakthrough. You can put up with 7-5 if 2 years earlier you won the Big Ten championship and we're in the national championship game, or, believe it or not, win a national championship, actually, then that obviously buys a ton of time.
Well, and I think the other thing is Michigan in the Jim Harbaugh era has skewed some things as well. And you can't necessarily expect to like that should not be an example for anybody, I think, based on the NCAA violations that went on. So to think like, well, if Michigan can do it, so can we. Michigan, I mean, yeah, you're not going to do it that way, are you? Then don't use that as an example.
Yeah, sometime in the offseason, we're really going to have to grind down on how Ohio State, and I truly hate to be a homer, and I say this on occasion doing the national call-in shows and so forth, is that I actually don't like being an Ohio State fan doing what I do, because I would like to be completely remove my fandom completely. I'd love to be a Purdue fan, Kansas State fan, and then we don't even talk about my team ever. I can just root for them on the side. But Ohio State's obviously in the middle of every discussion. And it's just come to a pinnacle. And hopefully for Ohio State, it has not come to a pinnacle. But in the last couple of years, even in their failures, but now winning a national championship, that no other program is doing what they're doing as consistently as they're doing it for 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, 50 years, 70 years. It's not being done anywhere. I hate to put them in a class by themselves, but in many ways, this football program is in a class by itself, because anybody that can match them, it's in a certain box. Georgia recently, Alabama, well, that has to be shown that it's been maintained by the current coach. We shall see. Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there's no the spikes in Ohio State's timeline are much different than the spikes in everybody else's timeline, where it's just the peaks and the valleys. Ohio State doesn't have the valleys. They don't necessarily have the peaks that other programs have, but they don't have those same valleys. They don't disappear for 2 decades like Alabama did, or 3 decades like Georgia did, or
Texas.
Oklahoma. Like you got to go back a long ways. Like, Texas had the one bright spot, well, maybe 2 bright spots under Mac Brown, where you got, Vince Young wins a national championship. Then they're in the national championship game with Colt McCoy. He gets injured against Alabama. But like the down years are really down. And the down year at Ohio State was 6-7 with an interim head coach, between a Hall of Fame head coach and another Hall of Fame head coach. And there were 3 Hall of Fame head coaches before that Jim Tressel head coach. And then there's, you got Urban Meyer handing it off to Ryan Day, and Ryan Day has, 10 losses in 7-8 years now. So like there's nothing like Ohio State in terms of just the overall consistency. Have they won as much as this team or this team in this national championship in this 8-year window? No. But is that how we're judging the 100 years of the sport? No.
They have 20 regular season losses in the last 20 regular seasons with a permanent head coach. So take out the fickle year. They've lost 20 regular season games in 20 seasons. Nobody else is doing that.
Well, if they played in the SEC, Mark, they'd be about 14 losses a year in the SEC.
Which brings us to, and I'll remind everyone that the Amazon link's in the description section of this video and all the videos. And when you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide. And I will check the chat for any good questions, and you guys can do likewise. I will say it's legitimate in my eyes. I think I'll get a little pushback from Tony in particular. The SEC, the way this is playing out, and we really kind of grinded this down the last couple nights, is setting itself up to just flood that college football playoff field, and somewhat legitimately. And because when I look at USC, Michigan, Iowa, put Nebraska to the side, they won this non-conference game against Cincinnati. I really don't think they're a good football team, a team that loses by 3 scores to Minnesota. I think they've got losses in their future. And obviously, Iowa's got to play Oregon. I'm not promoting them as a great football team, but those 3 teams are on the cut. And Washington, throw in Washington. They're on the place where obviously they got to win out. Most likely have to win out. They all have 2 losses. Those 3, the first 3 I mentioned, USC, Michigan, and Iowa, all lost their big non-conference game. And that's something that most of the SEC teams can say, hey, we took care of business outside the conference. If you're Texas A&M, Georgia still has to play Georgia Tech, etc. Most of them did. 11-4 outside the conference compared to 6-8 for the Big Ten. And that's caused this logjam for the SEC, where they may not grab the first 2 spots. Shoot, it could go to Ohio State and Indiana potentially. But after that, they're in a position to flood this playoff field.
Because that's what it looks like.
I'm sorry to throw in one more caveat to that. Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon seem to be shoo-ins, but if Oregon falters with a trip to Iowa, Washington, USC, then it's a little perilous after that.
I mean, maybe
Michigan's going to lose to Ohio State most likely. USC still has some tough games ahead.
Yeah. Oregon could get in at 9-3 as like the 11 seed, maybe, or whoever. I don't know. This feels like a year where we'll have a 3-loss team as a at large, because and not as a conference champion that is considered a qualifier, automatic qualifier, because, as you mentioned, a lot of those SEC teams have already had their second loss, and there'll be some quality there with a 3-loss team, and same with the ones you mentioned from the Big Ten too. So maybe 1 or 2 of them squeak in there. And in fact, as I looked back over 20 years of whatever it was, I did notice that from a number of years there were 2 3-loss teams that would have been in the playoff under this format using previous seasons. So I think it is entirely possible that that's what's going to happen.
Well, I think the 5 SEC teams that have 0 loss or 1 loss, you can almost put them in right now, and that's including Vanderbilt, who might still lose at Texas and at Tennessee. Like, there could be one of those 3-loss teams. I do think there's going to be 3-loss teams because you've got to fill out the bracket. And I don't know that any of the 3-loss Big Ten teams would get in over the line of possible 3-loss SEC teams, because USC would have to win at Oregon to stay in the hunt. And I think, to me, they're the most likely. I don't even bother looking at Iowa for fear of my eyes. Michigan should lose against Ohio State. So, to me, USC is the only viable. And I haven't really looked at like Washington. You look at their schedule, and they could do it with a home game at or against Oregon. That would be, I think, USC and Washington have maybe the best and legitimate arguments to be in as a 2-loss team. And again, with so many, you're going to have to, as I said, you're going to fill up the bracket. So I think Washington with 2 losses, they're in because they'd have some good wins eventually. The SEC is just going to continue to beat each other up. So the teams that have 2 losses now, like, I don't know that. How many do you expect to stay at 2 losses? I think Tennessee could, without going through all of these schedules. Like, I don't. You at some point, you can't expect. You've got you're 500 in the SEC, or you're 3-2, and you've got 3 or 4 games left. And are you going to win out? Probably not. But I do think you can go ahead and put in 5 right now, and 3 from the Big Ten is probably what I'm thinking right now. So Notre Dame is another one, provided they don't lose somewhere. And so what does that leave? 1 Big 12, 1 ACC, and then one group of 6 teams, if we did the math right.
I don't know if you guys have looked at this, but part of me does not want this to happen, because I shouldn't say this, but I do want as many Big Ten teams to be in the field as possible. But I would love the chaos, and I would love to see the committee try to figure this out. You looked at this, Tony. So if, let's say, Georgia Tech beats Georgia, let's say Virginia and Georgia Tech, and neither one of these are great football teams by any stretch, especially Virginia, but their schedules are cake, especially Virginia's. Georgia Tech does have Georgia. Let's say they arrive at the ACC championship game, having run the table, and let's give the win to Virginia. They're 12-1. They win the ACC, obviously they're in. Georgia Tech's 12-1, having just lost the ACC championship game. Meanwhile, Miami and Louisville also do not have daunting schedules by any stretch. They run the table. You've got 12-1, 12-1, 11-1, 11-1, and most of us would agree that Miami's probably the best team, but they would be in 4th place with a tiebreaker loss to Louisville, in a sense, at 11-1. What does the committee do? They're not putting 4 ACC teams in the field.
No, absolutely not.
And you're making a great argument about the fact that there doesn't need to be a 3-loss team should things shake out. And you can reward teams that do well in conference play. And go back to like the Big 12 with if BYU loses in the Big 12 championship game, are they going to hold BYU out if they're undefeated at that point? That's not something. Generally, last year, if you made the conference championship game, you were rewarded for that if you had the numbers to back it up. And I'm trying to think with the Big 12, what was it last year? They let Arizona State in, but who did they play in the conference championship game that year? And so Iowa State just didn't have the resume.
3 losses. Yep.
Yeah, but if you're talking about Texas Tech versus BYU, and maybe they both have 1 loss, and BYU's loss came with the backup quarterback, which they're going to take into account, that may be a situation where the Big 12 gets 2. I believe Texas Tech and BYU still play in the regular season, so things have to shake out correctly to make all of this happen. But, the Big 12 is interesting. I'm not expecting much from Cincinnati, but boy, those numbers in the ACC are hard to ignore. But it will be interesting when we look at the rankings on Tuesday night, how many SEC teams you see ranked, especially at the bottom, when they're trying to prop up. Like, let's see where LSU is. Are they 25th so that the committee can prop up all of these? They got 14 ranked wins against opponents that this SEC team has. It's like, yeah, but it's SEC, it's LSU, and it's whatever, Florida, and it's like, why is Florida 24th? And it gets a little cumbersome watching their rankings towards the bottom of the list.
I looked up the schedules for all the 6 SEC teams at the top, and the only game, there's only 3 games left between those 6 teams, and Texas is in all 3 of them. They have to play Vanderbilt at home this week. Then they're off a week. Then they're at Georgia, which they play twice last year. Does that sound right? and then Arkansas at home. Nobody cares. And then on the Friday, Black Friday, they play Texas A&M at home. So, I mean, they're the wild card in this whole thing, and they can't lose another game, because if they lose another game, they'll have 3 losses and will, be looking up at trying to get into the playoff as opposed to having its spot. So they could really shake this whole thing up and make it much.
Whoops. I don't know if Steve had intended.
My dog started barking.
There we go. I got you. Steve, I'm gonna stand up for Arkansas a little bit here. They have lost every game by 1 score. They have been like in the red zone in multiple of those games to win the game against Ole Miss, against
like 45-42 against
Tennessee.
A&M, and we think A&M is God's gift of football.
They
You ain't
lost to
seen
Tennessee
Ohio
by a
State
field
or
goal.
Indiana play a shit team like that 45-42. I mean, give me a break. I mean, whatever. It just means more.
Yeah, so that's that
I
is
loved all the jokes at Brian Kelly's expense this week. A lot of them very poor taste, but you can figure where I'm going with that.
Yes.
Eesh.
Yeah, can you imagine our 4 conference champions being Indiana, Cincinnati, Texas A&M, and Virginia?
Oh, Paul, there's no good teams in this playoff.
I mean,
they're all 11-1 or 12-0. Why aren't they good teams?
Thank NIL.
They ain't good teams.
Like getting everybody back on the same parity has made some interesting brackets, and I don't think any of us expect that bracket, but the fact that it's possible in November, I think is great. And that's one of the reasons I like the expansion of the playoffs, is because we're talking about these sorts of things rather than we're already dismissing all of the Iowa or USC or whatever, like the SEC teams. Like these are already teams being dismissed, and now we're like, well, perhaps they will host a playoff game, and maybe Ohio State will host a playoff game against this team or that team. So I like that the fact that there's so many more options for so many more teams.
Oh, I love scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
I love scenarios. I love the last weekend of the baseball season. I love the last weekend of the NFL season. Tony, who do you think, and I'll ask you as well, Steve, who do you think is presuming you're on board with Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, the 4th best team in the Big Ten, and or the team that's got the opportunity or the best opportunity to make a 4th bid from the Big Ten?
Boy, that's a great question. Is it the team that is barely on the screen there? Is it Illinois as the 4th best team in the Big Ten? Because I can't give it to Iowa because of Mark Gronowski's passing.
Really? You think Illinois?
I don't know that there is a 4th best team. Because they're all very, very flawed. If I were to pick one of matchups in all of these scenarios, I might go USC, even knowing didn't Illinois just beat them? It's like, shh, that's not important right now. And if you put all these teams in on a neutral field, I might take USC because I'd like to take Washington, but I saw how badly they looked against Michigan, which is not good for them. But Iowa just keeps staring at me, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be fooled by the athletes on the perimeter and the name brand and all that, but I tend to agree with David and Ed that I think USC is the 4th best team. Now watch Iowa go out there and beat them 16-13 in a few weeks.
They'd be the team that, if you're aside from Ohio State, the problems that they have with Michigan, if there were no labels on these teams, I think USC would be the team that poses the biggest threat to the most of these teams.
Iowa has scored more points than all of those teams in Big Ten play in 5 games, and they've all played 5. Iowa has more points scored than Washington, Nebraska, USC. Iowa has more points scored in 5 Big Ten. Well, they played one more game. Okay, apologies there. If USC can score 16 points, they got it. But they've scored more than Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, Washington.
That's a statement against the Big Ten rather than for Iowa.
Yeah, they got 38 against Rutgers, 37 against Wisconsin in a shutout, and 41 against Minnesota in what felt like a shutout.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the team that can shake this whole thing up. They're off this week, then home with Oregon on October the 8th and at USC on November the 15th. If they win those two games, then I think you almost, and they're going to beat Nebraska at the end because they always do. I mean, that's the Charlie Brown, Lucy Van Pelt game, as I always like to refer.
9-1.
Lucy has that thing set right there on, ready for Charlie to put that thing through the uprights, and then whoop, sorry, bro, up in the air, whoosh, 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 whoosh. Go Big Red, Not today, bro. Not today. So, yeah, Iowa's the team that can really shake this thing up. And, if they win those two games, they ought to be in the playoff probably. I mean, why not? I mean, their two losses would be Iowa State and Indiana. So, sure, why not?
I couldn't wait to get on here 2 Friday nights ago after Nebraska lost by 18 points to Minnesota and say, I do not want to hear anything else from Nebraska fans until you win a meaningful game. And I just put Minnesota in the meaningful game bucket for you. And you lost by 3 scores.
Yeah.
Beat someone before we have to hear about being a playoff contender and all this other business. Do not lose.
Enjoy the Music City Bowl
to ranked teams. Like, it's just unbearable.
Enjoy the Guaranteed Rate Bowl.
All right, Tony, what's going on this week?
Obviously getting ready for the Penn State game. Just posted a story yesterday about, from Terry Smith's perspective, talking about, he is the Penn State interim head coach, talking about the challenge of Ohio State and how Penn State needs to be attacking more on offense, and they need to continue to play well together. Dropped a podcast today talking about Ryan Day, what he had to say yesterday, and the Brian Hartline rumors, and this is the silly season for rumors, especially now that the coaching carousel is 2 months earlier than normal. So we discussed that a little bit, and then we'll have a couple more shows this week previewing the game, doing our bold predictions, and things of that nature. And we'll talk to Ryan Day and captains tonight, so we'll have something posted from that as well.
And if everything goes as scripted on Saturday of a 27-7 win, is not the performance of the running game going to be the first thing that should be evaluated?
I mean, until it's looking good, that's going to be the question that keeps coming up, because you can talk about how it's the RPO is part of the running game and you get yards that way, but the yards per carry is still the yards per carry, and until that gets better, things are going to be questioned.
The beatings will continue until morale improves. That's kind of the Ohio State take on the running game right now. But yeah, us, just a lot of the same stuff Tony's talking about. I'm going to write my annual story about the other border war and lament the fact that we won't be seeing those white uniforms and white helmets for a couple of years after this one. So yeah, it's something, but yeah, that's what's going on. Again, we thought this was going to be 1 versus 2 in the preseason, and it's 1 versus 72 instead. So, yeah.
Folks, the Amazon link's in the description section of the videos. Please use the link when you shop on Amazon to help us grow the channel. Check out Steve's work at Bucknuts, and of course, Tony on the Buckeye Weekly podcast and BuckeyeHuddle.com. Gentlemen, always appreciate you being here. We will see you next week.